it's producer Mark at KCMO Talk Radio, and if you're an NFL or college football fan, check out my weekly sports betting podcasts. Search College Pick'em Program or Sunday Sharps wherever you get your podcasts, and hit that subscribe button for my weekly picks, including the Chiefs, Mizzou, Kansas, and K-State. Now here's the Monday in the Morning podcast.
You should have seen John and Mark at the holiday party last night. Woo! These guys were hanging from the chandeliers. My gosh. Good morning. It is great to be here on a hump day Wednesday morning at 6:05 on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. You never see Mark without a hat on, but he did not have a hat on last night, and he doesn't have a hat on today, so he's keeping that good hair going this morning.
I'm rolling with it. I don't really have a hat that matches this hoodie very well, so that's part of it as well.
So you telling me every day you try to match your hat with your hoodie?
Hat to hoodie, baby. Wow. That's how it goes.
That's a lot of work, man.
Well, that's what sets apart man from beast, the ability to accessorize.
I guess so. Yeah. Man, I'm just lucky if I get my underwear on straight. Well, good for you, Mark. Nice job. Oh, we had a good time last night at the Cumulus Kansas City holiday party. Talking about that throughout the morning. Mark got his Chiefs tickets for Saturday, so good on you there, Mark.
That?
Woo!
Mark won some Chiefs tickets. He was all fired up about that. That guy just always finds his way into games.
No, seriously, we had, 40 stars. They kind of hit around a little game, find a star, come up, redeem a prize. Mark's the last guy. Everybody else is pretty much claimed popcorn, tins of popcorn. I think you and I got some restaurant trade, so we're going out to eat here soon. Mark's looking everywhere, left and right, high and low, half hour after everybody's done.
Eddie finds Chiefs tickets. Let's go. Way to go there, Mark. He's going to be at the Texans game on Saturday. Did you find that babysitter yet?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Kind of got home late last night.
All right. Well, you keep working on that. Yeah, it's right. It was pretty late by the time you got home. Well, meantime, I do want to kick off the show here with Missouri U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. So, speaking of sports, Josh Hawley was on Capitol Hill yesterday, and he got into a pretty heated exchange with the president of the NCAA, Charlie Baker. And this hearing was largely about legalizing sports betting and what to do and how to go about doing it. But one of the issues that came up yesterday with Charlie Baker, head of the NCAA, was, and this guy's the former governor of Massachusetts, in case you didn't know. He's now the president for the NCAA. Was about transgender athletes competing in sports. And the NCAA has been totally cowardly on the issue. They have not been willing to just say, listen, this is not about being anti-trans or anything like that. We just do not believe. And frankly, the data would back it up that biological men should be competing against women in sports at our level. We don't think that's fair. We've seen examples of this, right? Where very mediocre swimmers have suddenly shown up and won medals at the NCAA. That's how Riley Gaines came to be a prominent figure.
And the trophy.
Yes.
Or the medal, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So you'd think the NCAA at some point would have a backbone and take a stand on this. They have not. Josh Hawley called out NCAA President Charlie Baker yesterday on Capitol Hill.
Have guidelines that instruct them what the best practices are, and your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all. Correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities. And many,
what does that even mean? Optionality. What it says is transgender student athletes will be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet in accordance with their gender identity. That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
So it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous. It's totally outrageous.
Well, this is par for the course for the NCAA. If you're a college sports fan, you know the NCAA has been totally neutered, no pun intended, given the conversation, for a very long time. Whether it's paying the players, whether it's determining whether or not biological men should be in women's locker rooms at the college level, whether it's whether or not biological men should be competing against women in college sports. The NCAA has never been a leader in any of these conversations because they don't want to be. And this predates Charlie Baker. If you're a casual college football fan, you know that we've got this 12-team college football playoff starting this weekend, and it's going to be great, but it's a total mess because you have players going into this crazy transfer portal because every player is right now on a one-year deal with free agency basically in place after every single season. So you have players, some of whom, yes, they're probably backups, but they're on these teams getting set for the college football playoff, and they're telling their teammates and their coaches, hey, I got to go. I got to hit the transfer portal because, well, I've got some money to make. That's happening all over college football. So the NCAA has been a follower for far too long. That's how you end up with the mess that has become, and I love college sports, but it's become an absolute mess. Whether it's on that front, whether it's on this front, where Josh Hawley rightfully points out that the NCAA likes to point the finger in a lot of different directions. Hey, you know, it's the Fed's fault. If you guys just gave us some direction, we'd be fine. And then you hear Charlie Baker say in that clip, well, we trust the local organizations to do their work and do their job, and we'll let the schools determine who's using what locker room. It's like, guys, would you just have some guidelines? Would you just have some type of moral compass where you can give direction and say, we're the NCAA. We used to be a pretty powerful organization, and we are going to stand up for the young women and stand up for Title IX in this country. And as a father of 3 daughters, I wish Charlie Baker would do it. Not because I think my kids are necessarily going to be, you know, the greatest soccer players and swimmers and anything like that, but just, you know, stand up for the young women in this country so they don't have to be subjected to the Will Thomases of the world. The swimmer from UPenn, who was a mediocre dude swimmer, decides to be a female swimmer, and then he's changing in the locker room, and Riley Gaines is out there telling her story. She was in this studio a couple of years back telling her story before she got big time, and it's just beyond absurd and bizarre. At any other time in American history or world history, we'd be like, yeah, that's probably not right. But now you sit here and you got people defending this. You have people say, oh, what's the big deal? I mean, just relax. It's not that big of an issue. It's only like a handful of people. That's not the point. It's not about how many people it is, how many people are subjected to this. I saw that argument a lot over the last 12 hours after Josh Hawley's back and forth. Dick Durbin in Illinois responded to that back and forth between Josh Hawley here in Missouri and Charlie Baker, the NCAA president. And Dick Durbin wrote on X last night, there are 510,000 NCAA athletes, 10 or fewer transgender NCAA athletes nationwide. Let's focus on ways to actually improve women's sports, writes Dick Durbin. Well, that's nice of Dick Durbin to put out there. But now they are totally deflecting from the issue. What they're saying is, it's not that big of an issue. I would ask Dick Durbin, what are the number of athletes where you would consider it an issue? What is that number? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? When does it become an issue? And for every single male who is in a female locker room at an NCAA event, well, guess what? That impacts potentially hundreds of other women who are changing in that locker room. Dick, that's exactly what they don't want to see, buddy.
Yeah, how about you poll the athletes on whether it's an issue?
Yeah, there's a concept. Why don't you ask the women in the locker rooms whether or not they sit there and say, I'll take my chances, not a big deal. It's fine if my politicians don't want to stand up for me. That is such a lame excuse, but it also is very much on brand for people who just don't want to deal with the issue. They just want to act like, it's such a small percentage. Nothing to see here. That's not how people are feeling. It's not. And I never thought I'd say this, but maybe the NCAA could take the lead of Disney. I can't believe I'm saying it, even they're waking up in large part. I am absolutely shocked by this, but I will share that story with you coming up next on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM, and we're streaming all morning long on the KCMO Talk Radio app. 6:20, good morning. It's great to have you here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Things are getting back to normal in some respect, and then elsewhere you've got folks like Dick Durbin in Illinois who is pushing back on Josh Hawley, who is grilling NCAA President Charlie Baker yesterday on Capitol Hill because the NCAA won't lead the way on saying, yes, we will not have men in women's locker rooms. We're not going to do it. And Dick Durbin's like, nothing to see here. It's like 10 people out of 500,000. So, what's the big deal? Don't worry about it. Mike in Kansas City, what's going on?
Yeah, this ties into your story with Durbin yesterday about the Electoral College.
Oh, yeah, Dick Durbin yesterday. Yes, let me just reset that real quick. Dick Durbin filed a bill yesterday to try to eliminate the Electoral College. It was Dick Durbin, Brian Schatz out of Hawaii, and there was a third guy in there. But, yes, Dick and Schatz led the way. So what's your point there, Mike?
Oh, they're pandering to those fanatic billionaires that have been the puppet masters for the Democrat Party for about the last 10 years. The people, the men can have babies, the let criminals go, don't prosecute criminals, that really fringe group. And, and of course, what he's talking about today. That's all they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're wanting those billionaires to make sure that the, checks keep flowing.
Yep.
It's pretty obvious.
Well,
Durbin is probably one of the most corrupt senators in Congress. I mean, he'll do anything for the right dollar.
Well, he's from Illinois, so that's obviously a good place to start, right? No doubt about it. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. I don't know a ton about Dick Durbin. I just know this much. Over the last 2 days, we mentioned this guy's name twice. Yesterday, because he is trying to lead the way on eliminating the Electoral College. He wants it to be all based on the popular vote, which I will add, Donald Trump did winning. And then yesterday on Capitol Hill, what we're talking about today with this guy is him pushing back on Josh Hawley for calling out the NCAA president who would not lead the way on saying, listen, we are not going to have men in the locker room in the NCAA. We're not going to have men competing against women at the NCAA level. And Charlie Baker, who used to be the governor of Massachusetts from 2015 to 2023, was not willing to do it, did not want to lead the way, which is just beyond bizarre and just cowardly. So Dick Durbin doing his best to live up to his name, I suppose. That may be the best way to put it at 6:23. But I'll add this too. Disney is even waking up to their own woke nonsense. It'd be nice if other organizations started to follow. So Pixar's original animated series, Win or Lose, will no longer include a transgender storyline in a later episode, per The Hollywood Reporter. The series follows a co-ed middle school softball team named the Pickles in the week leading up to their championship game. Each of the 8 episodes center on the off-the-field life of a character and their point of view, whether it be a player, a parent, a coach, or an umpire. A spokesperson for Disney confirmed the story arc was removed and provided the following statement to The Hollywood Reporter. When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their own terms and timeline. The character remains in the show, but a few lines of dialogue that reference gender identity are being removed. A source close to Win or Lose said the studio made the decision to alter course several months ago. Disney declined to comment on any further details. Well, good on them. Good on Disney for waking up to something they should have been woken up to a very long time ago. See, that's the problem. When you appease the woke, you are not waking up. I don't need, and I have children, obviously, who are 6, 3, and 1, almost 1. And the reality is, I am far more likely to put on older shows that I know than say, oh, let's go on the Disney app here. Oh, look at this is a cute little show. Oh, they're doing baseball stuff. Oh, that looks really nice, doesn't it? If I don't know the show, I will have to sit there and watch it with them. And here's the thing. I'm not really interested in watching kids shows. I know, Mark, your girls are a little bit older, but let's be honest. Do you really like sitting there and watching shows that are geared towards 6, 7, and 8-year-olds? Do you want to be doing that?
No, I hear it in the background.
Exactly. Exactly. You're taking a mental break when you do that, right? That's the point of it. I don't really want to spend my time having to watch a little kid show and wondering whether or not they're going to be talking about somebody switching genders. I'm not interested in that. And I don't want to have to do it. So as a result, if it's a show I don't know and it's on Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever, I don't put it on. Unless Kate's like, yeah, we've watched it and this thing's fine and, just throw it on. Okay, all right, I don't mind doing that. But I don't want to feel like I need to vet every single show because I can't trust Disney, Pixar, whoever, Netflix, to put on something that is not driving some political agenda down the throats of a 5 and a 6-year-old. I don't want to do that. So Disney is maybe seeing the light here a little bit. I do not want to give them too much credit. I do not want to sit here and say, yeah, you got it, Disney. You got it all figured out. But I will say, just like dealing with toddlers, it might be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's how I would frame this.
I look at it as like judging a band's body of work, a criteria. Take Aerosmith. The early stuff's good. Early Disney classics. You get up to a certain point, and so in Aerosmith's case, the cocaine took over and the records were getting a little crappier. And then they bounced back, right? And they do great work here, and I think they finally retired. But nonetheless, their last body of work is just every bit as good as the previous initial work. There was a period in there where you kind of say, yeah, leave that.
It's like the career arc, right, of athletes or bands. It goes up and down and ebbs and flows. Exactly right. I'm fine with that analogy. And if Disney is going through a renaissance here, so be it. I know they've got the Mufasa movie coming out. The girls are excited about that, which I guess is a prequel to Lion King, basically. So that's cool. Hopefully Mufasa doesn't turn out to be a tranny or something like that. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm not going to be surprised by anything these days.
They worked in a deal where they're down protesting the Detroit football team down at the Silverdome, right?
Oh, brother. So all in all, Disney realizes that what they need to be doing is making things that are family friendly. And if you want to subject your children to that kind of content, I suppose that is your right as a parent, although even that is debatable. But if you're on the business end, if you're Disney, be smart. And this is at least a step in the right direction that they are being smart. And I hope I didn't give them any ideas about Mufasa. Well, this got a lot of reaction and feedback from you yesterday here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. And it's the story out of Platte County that is turning out to be quite controversial. So back on November 5th, 56% of voters in Platte County voted to establish the Children's Service Fund of Platte County. And what this would do is it would install a new sales tax that would expand mental health services for young people up to 19 years old. What happened on Monday is that the Platte County Commission unanimously approved an order rejecting the tax. So I talked to Platte County Commissioner Scott Fricker about this. He's the presiding commissioner yesterday. I'll get to some of that coming up here. But basically, the county commission is saying they don't need to do it. It was approved by the voters, but it really was more of a recommendation from the voters based on state law that does not require the county commission to install this new sales tax that would go on in perpetuity. And they don't feel like they would have a good grasp on determining where the money would go and making sure it would help people. And they basically said, we're not going to do it. So as you can imagine, you've got Democrats in large part freaking out over it because they have never met a tax that they don't like. Now, if I was a Platte County resident, I would have voted against this. Not because I don't care about the kids. And if you vote against this, oh, you don't care about kids' mental health. No, that is so disingenuous and so dishonest to portray it like that. But that's what, that's what many liberals always do when you say, I don't know if this tax is a good idea. What do you hate, the kids? You hate poor people too? Stop. But that's always the argument they use. But this one, I admit, I've struggled with. Not because Platte County is not on solid legal ground in saying we are not implementing the tax, but because, as I talked about a little bit yesterday at the end of the show, if the shoe was on the other foot and there was something that I voted for, and then the county commission said, yeah, we're not going to do it because you don't know what's best for yourself, that would piss me off as a voter. If it was in Johnson County and I voted for something and Mike Kelly, the Johnson County commissioner or Johnson County chairman, was like, you know what? We're not doing that because we technically and legally don't have to. And guess what? We know what's better for you than you do. I'd say, no, that's not how this goes, chump. So that is where I struggle with the idea. As much as I support the Platte County commissioners, I think they all do a very good job. I just struggle inherently with this. I'm trying to leave my bias for the individuals aside and say, how would I feel if the roles had been reversed? So Scott Fricker's the presiding commissioner, and here is part of what he said yesterday on the state statute that allows the Platte County Commission to basically reject the tax that the people voted for.
In this particular case, state statute specifically gives the commission the authority to either enact that tax or not. It says the governing body of the county may, after voter approval, levy the tax. And may is a very specific legal meaning. It's very different than shall. They're not interchangeable. We have the authority. I mean, this law was changed in 2005 specifically to give commissions this authority.
So that was Scott Fricker yesterday. And then I did follow up and I asked him and made the case of, hey, but what if things had been reversed? And here's what that sounded like. I would have voted against this thing if I was a Platte County resident. I mean, I made that very clear. Mm-hmm. Where I struggle, and I think where the conversation is at least mildly interesting, is I'm trying to look at it from the other side and say, okay, let's say Platte County voters voted against a tax or voted down a tax or voted to let's say there was a vote to repeal a tax. And then a county commission said, you know what? We're not doing that because this tax is vitally important to the people. They screwed it up. They don't realize how important it is. So we are not going to repeal this tax that the people voted to repeal. I would be bothered by that. Wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, but think of it like this. Because the statute allows us to make the final decision, you can think about the voters' choice here as a recommendation to the commission, which is exactly what it is. The voters said, the voters who voted on that particular day, which represents 30% of the population, wanted to enact this tax. So they recommended to the commission that we should enact it. It's like a recommendation from planning and zoning boards. We don't have to follow their recommendations.
That is Scott Fricker yesterday on the show here on KCMO Talk Radio, presiding commissioner in Platte County, talking about this sales tax that voters approved back in November, but the commission voted unanimously to reject the tax. And what he is saying is that there's a state statute that basically says they don't have to implement this tax if it gets voted on by the people. They may do it, but they are not obligated to do it. So the Kansas City Star, of course, because, well, they have never seen a tax they don't like, they put up an editorial this morning headlined, "The People's Will is Not Optional. Platte County must enact Children's Fund now." And, of course, they write things here like, by willfully ignoring the needs of their constituents, the commissioners put their own self-interest, dare we say ideology, ahead of what's best for teens and young children in Platte County. Now, that is so disingenuous because the idea that the only way to know and the only way to improve the lives of teens and young kids in Platte County is by taxing them and taxing constituents and adding another tax for taxpayers, it is really disturbing and sickening. But that being said, I continue to come back to my original point. As much as I don't like this tax, and I would have voted against it had I been a Platte County resident, because taxes don't solve everything, they don't solve most things. Should the commission go along with it? Or should they take the approach of saying, listen, if you guys really want to do something about this, then guess what? Bring in commissioners who are going to enact all the tax policies you want and do it that way. But we are elected by the people as well, and we are completely allowed to go about doing it this way and turning down this tax. 913-4087-957. And I continue to say, listen, if it was something I voted for, if it was something that I wanted to see happen, and then the county commission said we're not doing it because of a convenient legal loophole, I'd be on the show blasting that county commission. So I'm trying to be fair with this topic with you guys and intellectually honest as best as I can. Steve's up north. Go ahead. You're on KCMO, Steve.
Pete, you know something? You act and pretend like you're a conservative, but when it comes down to it, this is who you are. Because really, what was this tax all about? It was an ambiguous tax, championing children's mental health. Well, what the hell is that, and what is it really for? It's for sex change operations and hormone therapy, and that's what it is, because that's what these people would do with this money if they could get it. And that's the thing that you don't seem to notice. And the other thing is, we're spending all kinds of money taxing for social programs, this and that were never intended in our Constitution. And you don't seem to be able to figure that one out either.
Well, I think a couple of things, if I may. The idea that they would use it all for transgender surgeries, well, that's illegal in Missouri. So you're saying that this would be used to defy state law?
They don't have to do the surgeries, but they can certainly do the therapies. And that's a problem. And by the way, it won't be too long before we'll have it here in this.
Well, no, the Missouri law bans hormone and puberty blockers for minors. So I know, if you want to knock me, I'm a big boy. I can take it, but you got to have your facts right, Steve.
Okay. Well, okay. So you've got it. You made a point here, but I'm just telling you that the counseling, it may not be what you think it is.
Well, okay, but why does it make me anti-conservative to say, hey, I'm trying to, it's not that I agree with the tax. I hate the idea of the tax, Steve, but I'm also sitting here and saying if it was something that I liked and then my county commission said we're not implementing it, you'd be the first guy calling up the show, ripping the county commission too if the shoe was on the other foot.
I would, but here's the thing.
I would. Thank you, Steve. You're admitting your own hypocrisy.
But what are these taxes really for? We're taking money from some people and giving it to others. That really.
I agree. I agree with you.
This is not even what government is about.
I agree. I agree.
So,
Steve, I agree.
Notice that.
But the voters voted for it. And if you voted for something and then your county commission told you to pound sand, you'd be the first guy calling up getting pissed about it.
Well, yeah, I would. But I'm pissed about what you're doing right now.
There's no reason to be pissed at me about anything. All right. Steve, thank you. I'm going to get some other callers here. 913-408-7957. Let's go to John. What's up, John? You're on KCMO.
Hey, good morning. How are you doing, Pete?
I'm well. What's up going on?
Hey, I'm in Clay County, granted not Platte, but I got to back you on this one because if we go against what is voted, we're doing the same thing as Democrats do, and we're basically living up to their, if you don't have any standards, you don't have double standards, you don't have any standards at all. I mean, we can't do the same thing that we keep accusing Democrats of, they're just putting their will forward, not the will of the people. We don't like the election, how it came out, but that doesn't mean we just change it and don't do it just because we don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to count on the state legislature to back and enact laws to stop the gender affirming care, et cetera, things like that, if that's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, you can't just take a vote and just say, oh, we don't like it, we're going to throw it out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to have the standards. You can't look yourself in the mirror and not don't uphold the will of the people.
Thank you, John.
Vote, we lost. Okay, so now you work on how do you fix that vote the next election cycle.
Yeah.
Maybe they should put their efforts into that.
And what was how much effort was there on the no side of this tax in Platte County to get people out to vote back in November? That's the other thing I wonder.
Voting is an absolute. I'm not comfortable with it being a recommendation, but that's a bigger picture, not specific just to this. There's a larger topic there.
Yes. And, Platte County will say this is a recommendation from the voter. That's all this is. And state law suggests this is only a recommendation. And if you don't like it, take it up with the state. I get that too. But it doesn't mean this thing doesn't make me uneasy. And that's where I'm at right now. Just makes me uneasy. 913-408-7957. Pete Mundo on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. We'll get to you. Plus, something that happened in Independence this week. You're going to be voting on. A lot of dough coming up there. Next. 6:52, good morning. It is great to have you here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. We're streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. We're talking with you because the story out of Platte County is one that I understand, but it's also got a lot of gray area to it. And that is the Platte County Commissioners this week refusing to enact a quarter-cent sales tax that was voted on by 56% of the voters back on November 5. And the money's supposed to be used to address youth mental health. Obviously a noble cause. No one's denying that. But as is always the case, is more taxes the answer here? Is the answer to fix kids' mental health issues taxing people and setting up a children's service fund to Platte County to expand mental health services for young people up to 19? Is that the best way to go about doing it? The Platte County Commission basically said state law does not require us to enact the quarter-cent sales tax. It's more of a recommendation, so we're not going to do it. And as much as I'm somebody who would have voted against the tax, that just makes me uneasy. Now, I want to share this with you before I get back to you on this, and it's a follow-up that I had with the presiding commissioner, Scott Fricker. Our conversation is up on the podcast from yesterday's show, but he also put this in writing to me, and here's how he explained it. Because my hypothetical was this. If I voted for, let's say, repealing a tax in Johnson County, Kansas, or anywhere, and then my county commission said, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it because we technically don't have to. And these taxes are very important, and you don't know what's best for yourself. So here's what he said to me. Pete, in the hypothetical that you propose, if you were pushing for a tax cut and you knew for 3 years that your commissioners didn't support it and had the legal authority to overturn your vote, would you press forward anyway? Or would you work with the commission to find some middle ground with the hopes of getting something instead of nothing? He says this group knew for 3 years that we were all opposed to the tax, meaning all the commissioners were opposed to the tax. They came to us, asked if we would put it on the ballot. We said we can do that, but we also said we weren't going to. They got the signatures they needed. They put it on the ballot. They asked us to authorize the elections board to put it on the ballot. We refused. They filed suit. The judges dismissed our case and forced the elections board to do it without our authority. So they got this thing on the ballot. They went through the court systems to do it. They knew the commission was not going to back them. And they got their yes vote plowed through on November 5. So I understand it. I really do. I get exactly what he's saying here. And basically the answer from the county commissioners would say, if you guys want all these extra taxes, then vote us out as county commissioners and put in all the high tax people you want. But we are also elected by the Platte County residents. And that is a very fine argument to make. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. But I still struggle with the idea that people voted for something and now the suggestion is we don't have to do it. And that's what's going on here.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's more about the concept, not the specifics here. So anytime you say, well, what about this? Well, you can pick that apart. This is more general and not specific.
Exactly
There's
right.
a principle here.
Dave in Kansas City's on KCMO. What's up, Dave?
Hey, Pete. Hey, I agree with you 100% on this. But my biggest concern, not my biggest, but it's another concern, is it was approved by such a small majority that more people should have voted. I'm a Platte County resident. I voted against it, but it just makes me think that what else can they decide not to do and go against the will of the voter? I mean, I don't like it. I don't like it in this case because they didn't vote for it anyway. But that's a slippery slope, and who knows how far that could go.
Yeah, that's a good point there, Dave. Thank you. And I'll just add to it, too, because I've heard the argument, like, not a lot of people voted for this, and it was 30-some-odd thousand, and, you know, you got 110,000 people in Platte County. It's like, what are one of the big things that we talk about consistently on this show? People need to care more about their local politics. Everyone's going to go vote for president. They're going to go vote for Trump or Kamala. In the end, these county commissioners and these little sales taxes, or their perceived little sales taxes, that no one cares about and most people overlook on the ballot, or if it's an off-year election they don't go vote for, they have in some respects bigger impacts on your day-to-day lives than who's in the White House. People just don't care, though. It's like we've got to get people engaged on the local level on a lot of these issues because they have major impacts on all of our lives. In Independence, before we close out the hour, I do want to share this with you here. This was approved this week as well. For the first time in Independence history, the City Council voted unanimously to put 3 general obligation bond questions on the April 8th, 2025 ballot. 3 questions equal $197 million. Question 1 asks for $130 million to build a new Justice Center and acquire the animal shelter currently owned by Jackson County. Question 2 is $55 million to improve roads, bridges, and sidewalks outside of 7 different elementary schools, Independence, Fort Osage, and Blue Springs. Question 3 is $12 million for deferred maintenance on historical sites, including Vale Mansion, Bingham Wagner Estate, and the Truman Memorial Building, as well as for the Independence Athletic Complex. So that is $200 million. It would be going through a property tax for homeowners, estimated 82 cents for every $100 assessed. So I just want to keep you in the loop on that as well if you are an Independence resident. Coming up, how did Tucker Carlson derail the hopes of Mike Pompeo? The details on that are next. Big piece dropped last night on the Wall Street Journal's website, headlined how Tucker Carlson killed Mike Pompeo's hopes of joining the Trump administration. Of course, Mike Pompeo, a former congressman here in Kansas, who worked his way up through the Donald Trump first administration to become the Secretary of State, would be a guy who might be on the short list for a defense secretary. Mike Pompeo had walked the fine line of being loyal to Donald Trump while also trying to call balls and strikes as he saw fit. And he thought that if Donald Trump had won, he would be somebody who would be in the running for some type of a position. Well, that turned out to not be the case. As you may recall, days after the election, Trump put out a post on social media saying that Pompeo and Nikki Haley, and he called them both out by name, would not be landing jobs in his administration. And according to the Wall Street Journal, what happened here is Tucker Carlson approached Donald Trump with an urgent plea. Mike Pompeo had to go. This despite the fact that Trump was cozying up to Pompeo in the days leading up to the election. The day before the election, writes the Wall Street Journal, Trump praised Pompeo during a campaign rally, marveling at his recent weight loss and twice calling him handsome. It's very nice.
Such a nice man.
Calling him handsome. Well, Pompeo, I mean, I know he's been working out, but I'm sure that the Wegovy or the Ozempic hasn't hurt either, let's be honest. Either way, Pompeo's been looking good, and he's been, hopefully, from his perspective, getting set for another run with the Donald Trump administration. But then it turned out to not be the case. The Wall Street Journal writes here, but to Tucker Carlson, Pompeo was a risky pick. Carlson argued that he is a warmonger. He highlighted to the president-elect a list of grievances he holds against Pompeo, including what he said was an alleged plot by the then Secretary of State to assassinate WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, according to multiple people with knowledge of Carlson's efforts. Carlson went public with the allegations about Pompeo and Assange in an April interview on Joe Rogan's podcast without providing evidence, writes the Wall Street Journal. Trump's transition team spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said the president-elect's cabinet picks reflect his priority to put America first, adding that he will continue to appoint highly qualified men and women who have the talent, experience, and necessary skills to fulfill his agenda. The Wall Street Journal reported here that Carlson and Donald Trump Jr. outlined what they said were the dangers of bringing neoconservatives into the administration. Men and women, they claimed, who seek to control him, not to serve him. They also argued that Pompeo had proven to be disloyal. So Trump, within days of this pitch by Carlson and Donald Trump Jr., put out the post on social media saying, I am not going to appoint Mike Pompeo or Nikki Haley to any role in the administration. Now, I imagine if I was to poll this audience on this, you guys would say, that's fine by me. And I didn't expect Nikki Haley to get a role, to be totally honest. I thought that Pompeo might have a shot, but I did think he was an outsider in this whole thing. And I'll share this personal story with you as well. I had reached out to somebody close to Mike Pompeo the day after the election. And I went back on my text messages and I made sure this was right. So the day after the election on November 6th, I reached out to my Mike Pompeo contact. And I said, hey, I wanted to see if Pompeo could come on the show and potentially talk about whether or not he's interested or is going to be, involved in the next administration. And I got a response the next day at 4 a.m. saying, yes, absolutely, we'll check. And I wrote back, thanks. And then everything went radio silent. And Trump's post came out like 24, 48 hours later, and the thing had totally turned, and Pompeo was out. So I can't say I'm shocked by this based on my brief interaction with somebody in Pompeo's inner circle who was like, yep, Mike's happy to do it. And then all of a sudden it was, not going to happen. Pompeo probably thought he had an inside track, and he probably felt like he should have an inside track. I thought overall he did a good job as Secretary of State because between him and Trump, they did have a peace through strength mentality. But Pompeo was always a guy who was going to be a little more willing to probably play nice with the establishment and or do things like fund Ukraine and do some of those overseas deals than Trump was likely interested in doing. So it would have been a push and pull between Trump and Pompeo on some of these overseas issues. And ultimately, it sounds like Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump Jr. won out on this thing. And as far as I can tell right now, whether it's Pete Hegseth, Department of Defense, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, overall, Trump has a good blend of people who you would call like part of this MAGA 2.0 movement and also people who might be considered maybe a little bit more establishment like Marco Rubio. What I thought was also interesting in this Wall Street Journal piece is how they reported that there are people close to Donald Trump who don't like the Rubio pick, who thought it was too mainstream, and who are going to be targeting the guy, of course, politically speaking, during Donald Trump's first and only second term, I guess. The only first, second term. What are we calling this thing exactly? They are targeting Marco Rubio, basically keeping a close eye on him and saying, you know what, if we got to blow out little Marco, we'll blow him out and find somebody who can do a better job. I thought that was an interesting and overlooked part of the story. Now, speaking of some of the confirmations, yesterday you had RFK Jr. making the rounds on Capitol Hill. And Josh Hawley here in Missouri wrote yesterday on X that he got to sit down with Robert Kennedy Jr. He said we had a substantive discussion about American healthcare and his plans to take on Big Pharma. He said we also had a good discussion at length about pro-life policies at HHS, that's Health and Human Services, which is the role that Robert Kennedy has been appointed to by Donald Trump. And that's one thing that people have thought could hold back RFK from getting appointed. It's not really the Democrats, it's the Republicans, because RFK has been known to be, and is on the record as being, an abortion proponent. So is that going to make people like Josh Hawley think twice about RFK, even if they agree on a lot of big pharma stuff and making America healthy again? Is Robert F. Kennedy's stance on abortion potentially something that will hold back his nomination? Well, Josh Hawley said here that RFK Jr. committed to me to reinstate President Trump's pro-life policies at HHS. That's a big deal. If Josh Hawley is saying that RFK Jr. is pro-life enough for me, then there are going to be a lot of Republicans who say, you know what, whatever he said in the past, I'm willing to move on from, as long as he commits to having pro-life policies within the Health and Human Services Department. So when I read that yesterday on X, I thought to myself, RFK is going to get confirmed. Republicans largely are going to be in favor of him. And also, there will be Democrats who vote for RFK. Remember, this guy was a lifelong Democrat. So there will be cross voters on both sides of the aisle for RFK. The question with RFK is, would there be enough support from Republicans to get him across the finish line? And if Josh Hawley's like, I met with the guy, I feel good about the guy, and I have no issue with him when it comes to him being pro-life enough for that role, then I don't know who else is possibly going to have a problem with this. Josh Hawley then put on X late last night at about 8 o'clock. Something else Robert Kennedy Jr. and I discussed today, getting Americans exposed to radiation by their government well again and compensated. I appreciate his support for my efforts. So RFK looks to me like it's going to happen. And I am obviously very interested and totally down with his Make America Healthy Again. I don't agree with RFK on plenty of things. But I'll tell you right now, if he's going to go after some of the big food companies and get the garbage out of the food, the additives out of the food, just like they do in Canada and parts of the EU, then sign me up. If that's the one thing that RFK Jr. accomplishes as Health and Human Services Secretary, it will be a big win for the American people. I can help out Brian Stelter, the human chode, myself. I'm happy to do it. Brian Stelter, who is the chief media analyst at CNN, which is just a hysterical title to have. Chief media analyst at CNN. He got blown out, then they rehired him. It's like, brother, if you were a chief media analyst at anything, that network would not be in the toilet. They hired you, for crying out loud. So Brian Stelter put this up this morning here about an hour ago. And the headline reads, as President Biden prepares to hand back power to his nemesis, Donald Trump.
Such a nice man.
He is trying to make sense of what happened. Let me help you. You guys got smoked. Nobody liked the last 4 years of your policy. Anyway, Stelter writes here, he is zeroing in on the media's role in American society, and more importantly, on the changing definition of media. So I will share more of this newsletter from Brian Stelter here, but the long and short of it is this. Joe Biden and the Democrats at large are very upset that they do not control the media top to bottom anymore. They're very upset that they do not have complete control over the messaging to the minions, to the plebes. That's the long and short of this here. Now, here on Talk Radio, which, of course, we're on the podcast as well. You can find us there. But we were always the main foil to what you got from ABC, NBC, CBS, and elsewhere. We obviously have a very local bend to what we do here in Kansas City. But when it came to some of the national topics, you knew where we were more likely to lean on most issues. Well, now you've got a plethora. You've got a buffet, the word they're using in Jackson County, of options. Right? The media landscape is more fragmented than ever before. That's why, this show turns into a podcast after the show. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, wherever. That's why we want to work on adding a video element to what we do on YouTube in 2025. You've got to be everywhere now. You can follow this show on social media. You can follow Kevin on social media. You've got to be everywhere and anywhere you can be, because that's where the media landscape is going. You've got to be able to not just talk into a microphone. You've got to be able to do some video. You've got to be able to write. You have to be able to do as much as you possibly can in this changing media landscape. And generally speaking, competition is a good thing. Some people complain about it. I wish it was like the old days. I could just, turn on the mic and do a couple hours of radio and check out. It's like, there's good and bad to all of this. The good is there are more options. The good is you don't have to rely on NBC News for your news anymore. You don't have to sit around and wait for 5:30 to stare at Lester Holt and Lester Holt decide what he thinks you need to know in a given night. You can find out what you want to find out. Now, you got to be careful, because there are things, of course, on the internet that simply aren't true. There are things on social media that obviously are not true. And regardless of what side of the political aisle you're on, you can fall for that stuff. We all have, and that's why you got to be careful with it. But broadly speaking, competition is a good thing. But Brian Stelter writes here, Joe Biden is zeroing in on the media's role in American society, and more importantly, on the changing definition of media. Biden has brought up this subject twice recently, unprompted. First, in an exchange with the White House traveling press pool, and then on an economic podcast. He said he wasn't seeking to criticize the press. The structural changes he pointed out are much bigger than any single person or outlet. Frankly, he sounds like a lot of bewildered Democrats right now. Biden continues to describe a phenomenon that many polls have documented. Americans say they're happy at home, but horrified by what they perceive to be happening in the country at large. Biden also said mainstream TV and newspaper audiences are way down, alluding to the fact that people are soaking up news via social media and news sources. Where do you get your news? Biden asked. And what and how do you know what you're getting is not just what you're looking for, as opposed to what's really happening? The introspection is revealing, writes Stelter, but it also raises a question about whether Biden and his White House adequately reckoned with this new media reality back in 2021, when it mattered most for his political future. Well, basically what Stelter is saying, and he's giving Biden an off-ramp, to say if only Joe Biden knew and his minions knew the direction that media was trending, maybe Biden wouldn't have had to drop out. Maybe Kamala Harris would have won. And all you're doing there, all Stelter is doing, is giving them an excuse. And it's very insulting to the American people. It's very insulting to this audience, and it's very insulting to Kansas Cityans as well. The same media that is now wondering, gosh, where did it all go wrong, are the same people who kept Joe Biden's clearly declining cognitive condition under wraps for months until they couldn't do it anymore when he stepped on the stage with Trump in late June and didn't know what he was saying. And then you've got guys like Brian Stelter wondering, where did it all go wrong? See, here's the thing. Yes, competition has created a fragmented media environment. But if people believed if the media did a better job, especially since Donald Trump got into the political arena, telling the truth and just reporting facts, people would not have been seeking alternative media in the way that they have been for the last several years. It would have come to be because, listen, there would have been more competition and people would have been looking for other forms of media. But when you combine it with the way that these people have totally neutered themselves and totally taken themselves and their own credibility and thrown it right in the trash. They expedited the entire process, right? I mean, yes, new forms of media was always going to be a major impediment to their future growth, but combine it with how they horribly covered the news over the last decade in particular, and horribly covered and dishonestly covered Donald Trump over the last 10 years, well, they basically dug their own grave. That's what they did here. And, of course, Brian Stelter's not going to give you the skinny on that. Of course, Joe Biden's never going to come to that very obvious conclusion. But it's, frankly, one of the only conclusions to come to. It's the very obvious conclusion that anybody with any kind of common sense would come to over the last several years. But do you really think Joe Biden has that kind of introspection? I honestly, with all due respect to the man, do you think that the mental capacity is there to come to that very obvious conclusion? Of course it's not. There's no way. Not going to happen. But it also is not going to come as any kind of a surprise to me, and it's not going to come as any kind of surprise to you. 913-408-7957. That's the text line. And, of course, the studio line here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We're streaming all morning long on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Kevin Keatsman uncanceled, coming up at 10 o'clock. I'll give you a great example of this, by the way. We know about the border crisis, right? Same media being like, it's not that bad, not that bad. Don't believe your lying eyes. Same thing on inflation. Same thing on, Biden's mental acuity. Well, we have police chiefs around the country who are finally saying the quiet part out loud, that the policies of the people in charge for the last 4 years is leading to more crime in our communities. Who is the police chief? What did he say? And why did he say it? We'll share it with you next on 95.7 FM KCMO. Good on this police chief, Todd Chamberlain, in Aurora, Colorado. So yesterday, you had victims of a burglary call the police department there in Aurora, Colorado at 2:30 in the morning. And what happened? Well, you ended up having more than a dozen gangbangers linked to a violent Venezuelan gang in custody for allegedly kidnapping and torturing victims in an infamous Colorado apartment complex. It's the apartment complex that was in the news a few months ago when this Venezuelan gang overtook parts of the apartment complex. So 14 suspects were nabbed in this arrest. This apartment complex has been overrun by members of this Venezuelan prison gang. And the group is a mix of men and women, ripped a migrant couple from their home at The Edge. That's the name of the apartment complex. Then took them to another apartment where they were bound, pistol whipped, and beaten, according to cops. One of them was stabbed, but the injury is not life-threatening. So finally, this is the kind of stuff that's got to happen en masse all over the country when appropriate. You've got police chiefs taking the podium and calling out the policies on the southern border over the last few years as obviously playing a role in how we got here.
It was a male and a female. They were accosted by approximately 13 to 15 armed individuals. They were pistol whipped, they were beat, they were mistreated. One of the male was actually stabbed. He had a stab wound. So does that fall in the category of torture for me? Yeah, it does. There is a high assumption that they may be affiliated with the TDA gang. I had a discussion with an individual from the White House, and that occurred back on September the 23rd, I believe. And that person basically told me that, hey, once these immigrants get across the border, that's all we really care about. And to me, that's a problem.
Okay, I got a slow clap for that guy. Todd Chamberlain. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, brother, for saying the obvious part out loud. I know that cops do not want to be political. Their jobs are inherently apolitical. They arrest people who break the law, whether they are Republican, Democrat, white, black, Asian, Latino, it doesn't matter. They enforce the law equitably, of course, across all racial groups, socioeconomic groups. That's their job. But what you have seen in places like Aurora, Colorado, New York City, where, of course, you've had the influx of hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants has had impacts on the safety. Not because all these people are here to commit crimes. That's not the case at all. That's not what anybody is suggesting. But when you don't have border policy, what you get is a lot of people who obviously are here for the wrong reasons committing crimes in America, whether it's in Aurora, Colorado, New York City, or, God forbid, likely to a much lesser degree, Kansas City. We have not been one of those hot spots, although no one really knows, that's the crazy part, what exactly we are dealing with on this front. And I will ask Mayor Lucas about that tomorrow when he's on the show at 7:30 on KCMO. I want to see him get red-pilled like Eric Adams in New York City has been over the last couple of weeks. Eric Adams is calling out liberal media in New York. He's been empathetic to Donald Trump. He wants to work with Donald Trump. He's willing to work with the administration on deportations. We've got to get Mayor Q on that red-pilled train. Whatever is going on in New York City in that mayor's office, we've got to get here to Kansas City. There is hope for Mayor Q based on how Eric Adams is handling himself recently. But I saw the story and I said, this is the kind of stuff that's got to happen all over the country. Police chiefs need to step up. And when they are spending time, resource, and effort on, God forbid, illegal immigrant crime, bringing that up to the public is important. I think it's important to say to the public, hey, you've got these people who are committing crimes potentially in your backyard, in your neighborhood, and we are spending time and resources, and as a result, your taxpayer dollars on it to keep you safe from somebody or somebodies who your federal government is willingly allowing to come into the country with no strings attached. The more of that we have, the better off we are going to be. Elsewhere, Josh Hawley on Capitol Hill yesterday here in Missouri. He just laid into Charlie Baker. Charlie Baker's the president of the NCAA, and he was on Capitol Hill. They were there doing a hearing on legalized sports betting. But Josh Hawley, to his credit, went down the road of talking about men and women's sports and how the NCAA has been just so cowardly and taken a total backseat on this issue and does not want to lead. The NCAA has been a follower for far too long. That's how you end up with these bizarre transfer rule policies in college sports. Nobody's in charge. You've got the inmates running the asylum, and there is no structure. And part of that is because the NCAA has never wanted to lead on the issue. And just like they've never wanted to lead on that issue, they have not wanted to lead on this issue. And Josh Hawley called out Charlie Baker, head of the NCAA, who used to be the governor of Massachusetts. This was yesterday on Capitol Hill.
And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
You know, so it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous. It's totally outrageous.
It's outrageous, but you can tell that Josh Hawley is not the biggest college sports fan in the world. Because for any of us who follow college sports, the NCAA not leading on anything is par for the course. I mean, they literally have not led for a decade. We all saw what was coming down the pipeline with lawsuits and everything else that was happening around college athletics with paying the players, being able to transfer willy-nilly, and the NCAA basically said, we'll let the courts take care of it. We'll let state and federal governments take care of it. We're going to be hands off. There's nothing we're going to do. So why would you think they would suddenly lead on a much more controversial issue, although it shouldn't be, like men not changing in women's locker rooms, a la Leah Thomas, the UPenn swimmer a couple of years ago, and Riley Gaines, who sat right across from me in 2022 in the studio when she was campaigning with former gubernatorial candidate Derek Schmidt and said, I was subjected to a naked guy at the NCAA swim meet. And no one did anything about it. What makes you think that they were suddenly going to wake up and smell the roses, John? That was never going to happen.
Right? She tied with Leah Thomas.
Yeah.
Wasn't that right?
Yeah.
4 finishers, 3 trophies. Sorry, Riley, you don't get a medal here. We're going to have to give it to Leah for the picture.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're not thinking ahead on anything, let alone lead.
No way.
Right.
Yeah. They had to give it to old Will Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Had to make sure that.
Willie.
Yes. Slick Willie and his moose knuckle had to be up there on the stage for the NCAA. They were very proud of the moose knuckle on the women's swimming stage at the NCAA championships. And, of course, you've got people like Leah Thomas who are doing the work and having the bravery to stand up and say enough's enough. And as the father of 3 young daughters, I'm glad that we have trailblazers like Riley Gaines.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't think that we would have needed trailblazers like Riley Gaines to just stand up for Title IX, which is all that she's doing. But that's the world that we find ourselves in.
And credit to her. She was up the officials, you know what?
Yes.
Seriously, dude?
Yes.
Right?
She didn't hold back. You are spot on.
Mm-hmm.
She did not hold back, and kudos to her because, I mean, she really, I don't want to overstate it, but I genuinely believe that people like Riley Gaines should be considered historic figures based on the climate that some people want to create.